Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me virtually for our second town hall of 2024. I'm Congressman Mike Levin, and I'm so proud and honored to be your representative for the 49th District here in beautiful Southern California. Actually, they're in beautiful Southern California. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, but when I was first elected in 2018, I made a commitment that I would hold town halls every month, and I'm honored to have kept my word. This is our 108th town hall since I took office in January of 2019. And I hold in person, I hold telephone, and I hold virtual town halls for all constituents. And the different formats work well for different people. It really is an honor to serve, and I look forward to continuing to fight for our district here in Washington, D.C. Tonight, I'm going to provide some updates on my work, and I'm going to answer some of your questions that were submitted electronically. And I thought I would begin by addressing the recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling on IVF. I am so concerned about the impact that this may have on families across the country who are relying on IVF to have children. And I believe very strongly IVF must be protected, and I'm going to fight any policy that seeks to criminalize it. The government should never interfere with your right to grow your family in the best way that suits your needs. Now, let's turn to a few updates. As I said, I'm back in D.C., and the Congress is faced with two urgent issues that impact our ability to deliver essential government services and also to address border security. First is a looming government shutdown. We have to fund the government. Congress has to do the basic blocking and tackling to make sure the government is funded, and we have to do it by this Friday to avoid a shutdown and to avoid a disruption to essential services, whether it's veterans benefits, housing, transportation, you name it. And I'm going to continue to reinforce 2 points when it comes to government funding. One, as I said, the government cannot shut down. It would be disastrous in so many ways for our local economy, particularly our service members and their families who wouldn't receive paychecks during a shutdown. I'm thinking particularly of our junior enlisted Marines and sailors at Camp Pendleton and their families. Two, with Republicans in charge of the House and with Democrats in charge of the Senate and the White House, the only path forward is to come together and compromise on a budget. That's the only way it's going to work in divided government. And, you know, what that means is that millions of Americans are going to be hurt very badly if we can't find consensus. And that means that not only should Democrats and Republicans try to work together, but that Republicans under Mike Johnson, the speaker, needs to work to find agreement within his party on what kind of a compromise they seek. The second thing I want to talk about are some of the challenges that we are facing at the border. You know, we have real problems that need solutions, but if you've been paying any attention to this, you know that Republicans insisted on a border deal, and then Mike Johnson and Donald Trump killed that deal at Trump's request. And now it seems they have no appetite to work with us to take action. And look, the Senate passed a border deal. They worked together to create a border deal, James Lankford and Chris Murphy. And the deal was not perfect. But what it did do is provide necessary resources to the Border Patrol. It increased the number of agents. It helped with delays in asylum processing that we're seeing. And even though a deal faces really difficult hurdles, we've got to keep at it. You know, I am a co-sponsor of the Dignity Act. This is the first major bipartisan comprehensive immigration bill in quite some time. And it would also, I think, go a long way to address some of these border security challenges that we're seeing. But it wouldn't just do that. It would, I think, provide a solution for a lot of the immigrants who want to strengthen our workforce and folks like Dreamers and others. You know, Dreamers come here at a very young age and they study here, they work here, they pay taxes in the United States of America. And it's important that we don't forget about our Dreamers. So look, I think it's really critical that Congress take action on this. Enough talk. We've got to work together, and I stand ready to work with any of my colleagues, Republicans, Democrats, on solutions. That's what it's all about. And look, I want you also to know that while right now my party is in the minority and doesn't control the agenda in the House of Representatives, I am more determined than I have ever been to work across the aisle and get things done for our district. And I'm very proud of the fact that throughout my 5 years in Congress, I have passed 30 bipartisan bills into law, signed into law by both the previous Republican administration and the current Democratic administration to tackle some very pressing challenges, whether it's for our veterans or for environmental protection, for health insurance premiums, for much more. The bills that I have worked on address issues that I've heard about from you, that I've heard about from the constituents in our district. And I encourage you to share your legislative ideas with me as well, because some of the bills directly come from conversations that we've had with constituents. Some of you may know I'm on the House Veterans Affairs Committee and the House Natural Resources Committee. I'm the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Subcommittee for Economic Opportunity, which deals with things like the employment and training of veterans and housing programs and transition of service members to civilian life. That's been incredibly rewarding work where we made a lot of progress. I also remain dedicated to safely removing the spent nuclear fuel at the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, so critically important, and we're working very hard in a bipartisan way on that. Protecting our coastal railroad line, which we all know to be critically important, saving our beaches and our bluffs, and tackling the rising costs of energy, housing, and food. I'm going to continue to fight against chaos, against dysfunction, against extremism in all its forms. And I'm going to work with anybody I can here in DC for all of our constituents, whether they vote for me or vote for somebody else or don't vote at all. I'm going to fight for you, because representative is not only my job title, it's my job description. And that's what you need to do. You need to represent people, whether they agree with you or not. You do the best you can. So I'm just going to keep working on bipartisan reform, whether it's to fix our broken immigration system, whether it's on funding our police to keep communities safe. Anybody that's interested in making progress on the important issues that we face, I'm going to work with them. And that's my commitment, and it always will be. So let's, with that, get started on some of the questions that we've received. And I'm going to take these in no particular order. And let's start with Kate in Del Mar. And Kate asks, what actions do you personally support to address the crisis at our southern border? Is it true that the border is literally wide open for anyone to enter? Are the migrants that are being released into our cities even vetted? Well, thank you for the question, Kate. I can tell you that first, our southern border does have challenges that have to be addressed, and that's a fact. And in order to address these challenges, I think that Republicans and Democrats need to come together and find common ground. What a concept, right? Find common ground. Instead of just playing political games, instead of denigrating and demonizing the lives that are at stake. And as I said, I supported the bipartisan deal that was negotiated in the Senate that would have provided more resources to the Border Patrol, would have secured the border, and would have addressed the asylum challenges. And it wasn't perfect, but it was a big step in the right direction. But as we saw, Mike Johnson and really working at the request, the demand of former President Trump, killed that deal. And now they refuse to take action because Donald Trump doesn't want them to. And it's just political theater at its very worst. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to provide more resources to the Border Patrol officers in the field. We need to add more law enforcement officers. We need to expand access to the Shelter and Services Program. And that's particularly important in San Diego County. And that's to help our local organizations deal with these migrant street releases. I am a co-sponsor of the Dignity Act, as I mentioned. That is, again, the most promising recent comprehensive immigration reform and border protection legislation in a long time. Not just talk, but actually working together to try to get something done, try to provide a solution. You should also know that I recently sent a letter to Secretary Mayorkas requesting the help we need, the funds we need for our local organizations that are actually aiding the immigrants who are being released. And that funding, as I mentioned, the Shelter and Services Program, the SSP, that funding comes from those from that program. And I asked for all of the current SSP funding that we possibly can make available to be released to San Diego County and the organizations and the other local partners that are actually on the ground providing the critical assistance to migrants. So I will stop there. Let me get to the next question. Debbie from Carlsbad. Thank you for the question, Debbie. She asked, Joe Biden has continued to approve more drilling projects for oil and gas. As an environmental advocate, how do you plan to combat an administration that has, in some ways, stalled progress on a sustainable planet? Well, thank you for the question, Debbie. Look, I have said time and again, I think it is critical to the protection of our planet that we get the country off of its reliance on fossil fuels and we move towards a clean energy future. I think it's critically important. And look, I am the lead sponsor of legislation that would permanently protect Southern California from offshore drilling. Just as one example, we were very close to getting that signed into law, and only Joe Manchin stood in the way last year. I'm also the lead sponsor of legislation to help combat the climate crisis and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels by promoting the responsible development of wind and solar and geothermal energy on our public lands. And I've introduced that as a member of the Natural Resources Committee, and I'm working to garner more support for that bill. And look, I believe that we need to take an all of the above approach and think creatively about the solutions that can protect our planet for future generations. I think about this a lot as the father of an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I worry about the air quality and the water quality that they're going to have when they're my age and when they have kids. And I want to make sure that they can enjoy living in Southern California just as I did. And I also acknowledge the tremendous progress that's been made since I was their age, since I was a kid, when we had much worse air quality than we have today because a lot of the steps that we've taken around clean air. And that shouldn't be partisan. Having clean air, being able to breathe, shouldn't be partisan. So when it comes to the fossil fuels and the Biden administration, I don't support every move they've made. I know they've had to contend with a lot of litigation that the fossil fuel industry has brought. But I was very pleased that the Interior Department adopted a proposal of mine to raise royalty rates on fossil fuel extraction. I think that was a step in the right direction. And look, ultimately, I think the administration needs to do more to end drilling on public lands and off our coasts. And you can count on me to push for those policies. And I thank you for the question. Next up is Eric from Oceanside. Eric says, the U.S. was the only country not to call for a ceasefire in Gaza at the UN. How does the U.S. benefit from continued violence in Gaza over peace? Thank you for the question, Eric. Let me begin by saying what I've said a number of times. I support a ceasefire that's paired with the release of the hostages being held by Hamas and an end to Hamas rule. Look, we need humanitarian aid for the Palestinians in Gaza and the Palestinians in the West Bank. I am a co-sponsor of the humanitarian aid resolution here in the House. I've supported the previous humanitarian pause, the pause that benefited both Palestinian civilians and Israeli civilians. And we desperately need another pause, another ceasefire. I'm sure you heard the president say that he hoped that we could get a ceasefire by next week. But let's be clear about something. We need a two-state solution. It is the only path forward. I will repeat that. A two-state solution is the only path forward that will lead to long-term peace and stability in the region. And I firmly believe that that is the way forward to allow Palestinians and Israelis to live in peace, to live in security and dignity in their own countries, and it can only be achieved through diplomacy. And it can only be achieved with new leadership on both sides that is going to put peace before their own political self-interest. It's as simple as that. And that means that Netanyahu's government needs to be voted out. It means that Hamas's rule must end. And so I am praying and hoping every day for a more peaceful future in the Middle East. Next up, Max in Ladera Ranch. Max says, most indicators show that the economy is doing extremely well. What do you recommend Congress do to ensure that this growth is sustainable? Well, thank you very much for the question, Max. Look, I think that the laws that we passed in the last Congress, the American Rescue Plan, before that, the CARES Act, you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act. I think all of these have worked to help save the U.S. economy from the devastation of COVID and the pandemic. And I think we're doing better than virtually any other major industrialized nation. You look at our jobs numbers, our unemployment numbers, the infrastructure projects that are beginning to have shovels in the ground, including well over $100 million worth of investment just in our district alone. And you look at inflation, which of course costs are still too high for certain things. There's no question about it. But inflation was around 9, and now it's quite a bit lower, obviously, than that. And I think it's important for Congress not to dilute the laws that were passed, the laws that were successful. And we should be strengthening them, not diluting them, not undermining them, and not caving to the demands of MAGA, of the MAGA Republicans, and His Majesty himself, Donald Trump, who want to roll back the successes. That's the wrong thing to do. Next up, Christian from San Clemente. Hello, Christian. Christian asks, what can you do at the federal level to ensure that dangerous mudslides like the recent one in San Clemente do not continue to happen in our district? Well, I got to tell you, Christian, the Mariposa Street Bridge and the San Clemente Beach Trail, that's one of my family's favorite places to go for a nice walk. We were there a week before the landslide and before the Mariposa Street Bridge had to close down. And it's really sad to see, and it feels like whack-a-mole to a certain degree, because all up and down our district, we've had so many challenges with regard to landslides and mudslides. I think we've got to make a couple things clear. Number one, it has to be a top priority for me. For as long as I have the honor to serve this district, we're going to have these sorts of challenges. It's directly a result of the climate crisis as well. And we know that nothing substitutes for building a relationship of trust and confidence between our office and the Army Corps of Engineers. And when I took office, that relationship hadn't been invested in the way that it needed to be, which is why there hadn't been a whole lot of progress in the years previous. You look, for example, between 2010, 2011, when a lot of the environmental review had been done for the San Clemente dredging project, in 2019, when I took office, very little had been done in that 8-year span to actually fund the project. The same goes for San and Encinitas or Solana Beach. The same goes for Del Mar Bluffs. The same goes for San Dieguito Bridge. All these weak links along the chain, along the low sand corridor, the funding wasn't there. And so what we did is we worked very hard to build a relationship, to make sure that our projects were at the top of the queue for the Army Corps. They understood it wasn't just about having a nice wide sandy beach or pretty beach to look at. It was about safety. It's about our local economy. It's about goods movement. It's about national security. And we made that case. We continue to make that case. So what do we need to do next? Well, we got to do all we can to get sand on the beach. We're working very hard to get sand on the beach. We're also working very hard to get the president to declare a state of emergency for the region, for residents and businesses to be able to access the funds that they will need to help recover. And look, the dredging work there in San Clemente. We got the money. I wish I could go out there and dredge the sand myself. We leave it to others who are experts to do that, and I'm hopeful that will happen. I know the $9 million we got for San Clemente and the $30 million for Encinitas and Solana Beach, that money is going to go a long way, and just as important is a 50-year commitment. It is a 50-year commitment from the Army Corps of Engineers for sand in those areas that are in critical need, where we know that if we fail to have sand, if we fail to nourish those beaches, that we're going to have major issues with stabilization of the corridor down the road, and also our bluffs and our mudslides and landslides will only increase in significance. Two other things that I can tell you. One is the bipartisan infrastructure law created what's called the Corridor ID program to identify the strategically significant rail corridors in the United States. The low sand corridor is now part of the Corridor ID program. That was an announcement that was made a couple months ago. At the same time, the announcement was made that we got $53.8 million for the San Dieguito Bridge replacement. This is all incredibly important stuff to protect us from landslides, to ensure that the corridor can be viable in the long term, while also, protecting surrounding communities. And I think that's all I want to say about the low sand corridor for now. I could go on and on, but I won't. Next question is Sarah from Solana Beach. And Sarah asks, let's see. Sarah from Solana Beach says, the reason travelers were unsafe on a Boeing airliner recently is due to the aircraft regulatory processes being dominated by the interests of corporate lobbyists. How can you fight this system that plagues not just aviation, but many industries? Sarah, I got to tell you, I'm on Boeing planes every week, and that is a terrific question, and one that I wish I had an easy answer for, other than I agree with you. I'm going to do everything I can to try to make sure that we're keeping consumers, the interests of consumers ahead of the interests of big corporate lobbyists. I have worked in many different sectors, many different industries, where it sometimes can be an uphill battle. I think of my friends in the nuclear industry. We just voted on a nuclear bill earlier this evening, and my friends in the nuclear industry don't always want to move the ball forward in a productive way, collaborative way, with regard to addressing the spent nuclear fuel challenges in the United States. And we need to make sure that, again, that health, safety, and well-being of constituents, well-being of the average person is more important to legislators. And I think it comes down to campaign finance reform. We got to get the money out of politics. I think it's obvious to me after 5 years of doing this that corporate interests play an outsized role in our political system. I think way too many members of Congress let them get away with it. And that's why I support campaign finance reforms. It's why I'm part of something called the End Corruption Caucus, and I'm proud to always have the support of End Citizens United. I take no corporate PAC money. And when I got to Congress, there were very few that didn't take corporate money. And now there's probably 60 or 70 of us that don't take corporate money. And there'll be more, I think, in the years ahead. It'd be great if a few more Republicans would actually get on board with that as well. But it's a tough ask on their side. The other thing I'll mention is that I have tried to lead on banning members of Congress from trading individual stocks. I've co-sponsored legislation that would eliminate that practice. I think it's critically important that we ensure transparency with members' financial transactions. The Stock Act, that's the existing law, clearly doesn't go far enough in ensuring that, that members of Congress do not use material non-public information to enrich themselves. Simple as that. And so that's why I believe we need a ban on individual stock trading for members of Congress. And that, interestingly, is bipartisan. There are a few Republicans that agree with me on that. We just need to keep at it. So it's not easy. when you look at the influence of big money in our politics, but that's what ultimately it will take, I think, to level the playing field. And that's certainly what I'm committed to. Adam from Laguna Niguel. Adam asks, which issues are your top priorities if Democrats take back the House? Oh, I like this question, Adam. And retain the White House. I like that too. And the Senate in November. So if we get the trifecta, well, this is a big deal. Obviously, I'm going to fight very hard to make sure we take back the House and that we make Hakeem Jeffries the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. I think he would do a tremendous job as Speaker. For me personally, I think continuing the fight for clean energy, tackling the climate crisis. You know, when I started, Nancy Pelosi put me on a new select committee for the climate crisis. And I was one of the 3 freshmen on the committee, along with Joe Neguse from Colorado and Sean Casten from Illinois. All 3 of us had brought background in clean energy and environmental and energy policy to the Congress. And we worked very hard, and we passed the biggest climate law in history, the history of the United States, the history of any country, that all got folded into a bigger bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. But the reality is we had passed a lot more in the House, and it, you know, as part of the Build Back Better Act, and a lot of it, you know, did not make it through what ultimately became the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's because of Joe Manchin. Simple as that. So what we need are 2 things. We need to finish a lot of what we started, and then we need hopefully enough senators to be willing to either agree to common sense clean energy policies that are going to move the ball forward, or to eliminate the filibuster in the Senate. And the other thing that I'm working on with regard to clean energy that I think is critically important is transmission. So if we're going to have a real transition to a clean energy economy in a meaningful way, then we're going to need to build a tremendous amount of new transmission infrastructure to carry all that new wind power, that new solar power to where it needs to actually be used. And our transmission and distribution system today is woefully outdated. The grid needs to be dramatically modernized. And so I have a bill, along with Sean Casten, one of those people I served on the Select Committee for Climate with, called CETA, the Clean Energy Transmission or Clean Electricity and Transmission Acceleration Act. And we got to get that bill, hopefully in the law, or make it part of a bigger law. You have to be opportunistic around here. Sometimes your bill will pass as a standalone bill, and sometimes you can get it included in larger must-pass legislation. But regardless, we got to get that bill through, because that will fully unlock the potential of everything that we've done with regard to tax policy and incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act. And also in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a lot of good things in there for clean energy as well. Another big one, we've got to codify Roe versus Wade into law. I mean, make no mistake, we've got House Republicans now, 125 of them voted to have life begin at conception with no exceptions. That would include IVF, no exceptions. And we know that Mike Johnson on these issues is extreme. And we know that the Republicans, if they had the opportunity, they would fight for a national abortion ban. We cannot let that happen. We've also got to do everything we can to reduce costs. We've got to finish the job. You know, we now, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, insulin is $35 a month if you're on Medicare. In fact, a lot of the private sector companies joined that effort, and now it's $35 even for them. Out-of-pocket costs for Medicare Part D starting next year are going to be about $2,000. Not about, they're going to be $2,000 a year. And finally, for the first time, Medicare can negotiate the price of prescription drugs, and that's big, and that will help. Because of the Inflation Reduction Act, energy costs will go down as well. But look, I know that we've got to do all we can to reduce costs for electricity, reduce costs for groceries, and housing. That's a top priority. Another one that's very timely is we've got to reach a real agreement on immigration and border security. Now is the time. We've got to do it. No more pointing fingers and casting aspersions. Let's come together and actually work to solve the challenge that we're facing. Another is spent nuclear fuel, nuclear waste. We've got to do everything we can to work with communities on a consent-based process to find one or more sites that can store the nation's spent nuclear fuel. We can't keep it where it's at San Onofre. There's many other sites across the country that also have spent nuclear fuel with reactors, both active reactors and decommissioned reactors, and they're not good sites either. Now we got to prioritize sites like San Onofre that have high seismic risk, have very high environmental and population density concerns, but we have to make sure that we change the law to have a new disposal or repository site, not just Yucca Mountain in Nevada, which has been dead for a very long time. And we have to continue to fund that process with the Department of Energy. We have to do all we can on voting rights, on making sure that we protect the right to vote, and that we fulfill the legacy of my late colleague, the great John Lewis, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And I would talk also, if we had, and I love this question, I mean, if we had the House, Senate, and White House, we've got to finally do more on gun violence prevention as well. We passed something called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was the biggest gun violence prevention bill in 30 plus years, and it helps fund state initiatives to put red flag laws in place. It tightens up background checks for those under 21, but it doesn't go as far as we need to go. It was a win against the corporate gun lobby, but I know that we need to do more. We need to do a lot more than that. But look, I think we've got unfinished business for the next several months as well on implementation of a number of pieces of legislation. I think about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and we're finally seeing this once-in-a-lifetime investment in roads and bridges and water systems. And as I said before, we've seen about 100 million plus now in investment in our district from that bill. It's truly remarkable. But I think at the end of the day, if we have that opportunity, we have to make the most of it, because you never know when that's going to come again. And I'm very proud. By the way, I'm very proud of what we did in the last Congress. And then when you compare the last Congress, which was historically one of the most productive ever, and you compare that with this Congress under Mike Johnson and the MAGA Republicans, it's one of the least productive Congresses ever. The contrast could not be any more apparent. So I want to thank everybody for submitting those questions. I hope that those answers were helpful to you. I appreciate everybody watching this, and I just want to reiterate my thanks to my team, everybody working so hard on the campaign, everybody working hard in DC as well. And I've got to thank my amazing wife, Chrissy, and my family for putting up with me, particularly given the crazy schedule in Washington, D.C. And if I didn't get to your question, you can email me by visiting my website. It's just mikelevin.org. That's MIKELEVIN.org. You can email me at info at mikelevin.org. And last but certainly not least, I would like to remind everybody that we've got to vote. Everybody needs to turn out and vote. We have an election coming up next Tuesday, March the 5th, the California primary election. Right now, turnout's very low. Across the board, turnout's very low. And I want everybody to vote. Doesn't matter. I'd love for you to vote for me, but I want everybody to vote. And so how can you do that? You got to postmark the ballot by next Tuesday, March the 5th. You can use an official ballot drop box. There are drop boxes all around San Diego County and Orange County. You can visit ocvote.com if you live in Orange County, or sdvote.com if you live in San Diego County, and then you can locate the ballot drop box that is closest to you. But please, please, please tell your friends, tell your neighbors, we've got to get out the vote. It's so critically important. There's so much on the line. And I would argue the future of democracy itself is on the line. When you think about everything happening in Ukraine in particular, we've got to make sure that we provide funding for our allies around the world, and we've got to stand up for our democratic institutions at home as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you, whether in the district or here if you visit DC. And until then, have a fantastic evening. Take care, everybody.